Vanessa, maybe you'll tell us a little bit about who you are and what do you think brought you here?
Sure. I'm going to lift myself up a little bit because I'm behind the podium.
Yeah, we should.
Or I can move the chair up in a second. So first of all, thank you very much for letting me join you this evening. I don't do this. We have to move. I will move.
Yeah, or those people can move over or something.
I'll just move up if you don't mind my back.
Oh, that's great. Not at all.
Oh, that's better.
So thank you
Hi.
for letting me join you all this evening. And I don't get to do evening events very often, and I'm actually reminded why this evening. I'm going to apologize. I'm going to have to sneak out on you all a little bit early because it was announced to me on my way out the door that my babysitter is going to be leaving early also. So I will have to run home, and I apologize for that because it is an honor to be able to be considered someone who started something that might be inspirational to anyone. And we're a young organization. So I am a physician, and in the course of my work, had spent time working abroad in sub-Saharan Africa and really saw that there were huge health needs. And that while many doctors or nurses and folks would fly in and potentially deliver care and leave, there wasn't really a legacy. There wasn't skills being transferred. There wasn't a handover of information that was really investing in these countries, and felt that needed to change. Also because there was a huge demand to be involved in something structured and to be able to give back in global health here in this country. And so we created something called Seed Global Health, which partners with the U.S. Peace Corps to send doctors and nurses abroad to be medical and nursing educators for 1 year. They work as local faculty. They live very much like their local counterparts, and they spend the year teaching, training, and helping to build a new generation of doctors and nurses who are highly skilled, capable of not only delivering outstanding care, but being able to teach. Last year, we taught 2,800 people in over 32,000 work hours, and we taught over 85 new skills, courses, and other educational efforts. These volunteers are extraordinary. You know, I mean, I could rather tell you about them than sort of talk about what we've done. But one of our volunteers, Maureen, within 5 hours of being at her site, got a knock on the door and was called to the operating room emergently. She saw a pregnant woman on a table dying because she had a ruptured uterus because she'd been in labor for 3 days in her local village.
Oh my gosh.
She had 5 children, and the baby she was carrying had already died. And Maureen realized she had the opportunity to save this woman's life, and she performed an emergency hysterectomy. So this woman, she not only changed the course of life for this one woman who will now go home to her 5 children, ensure that they grow up with a mother, are more likely now to continue school, less likely to fall into poverty when they're older. But she also changed the course of women and pregnant women in northern Tanzania, where 1 woman dies every hour from a complication of childbirth or pregnancy. So these are the people that we're sending over because Maureen taught all of her colleagues how to perform the surgery and when and why. And that's a really extraordinary gift that she's been able to do. And so our hope is that as we send more Maureens over, we have 42 volunteers in the field this year, we can begin to have a bigger impact over time, and we can finally break down these 2 standards of healthcare that we see existing in the world.
Thank you. Can you follow that, Diane?
I was just going to say, oh, thanks a lot. Maybe in order to tell my story, I'll start from the beginning, and you'll realize that we probably have a lot in common. So I have a younger brother who, when he was 2 years old, my younger brother was Vanessa. He was 2 years old. My parents gave him one of those. Yeah, my parents gave him one of those leather doctor kits. And he opened it up, and we pulled out the stethoscope, and he put it around his neck, and he was done. He ended up being great in science. He was brilliant. He wanted to be a doctor for his entire life. He became a surgeon. He's really successful, and I don't think he ever had one day when he said, I wonder about the road not taken. He's never said, I wonder what my next chapter is, or any of those things. He didn't ever have a problem saying, I wonder where I want to be 5 years from now. And I thought everyone was like that. What I realize is that most people are like me. We're just kind of unsure. And if you're at Northeastern, you know, I was the kind of person when I was in college who I just wanted to be undecided for as long as possible because you never know when things are going to change. But over time, I think that I've become really good at playing things by ear. And the way that I do it is I'm very, very conscious of what my experiences are and what I'm learning. And I try to tuck things away in the back of my mind. So for instance, I was always interested in business. And when I got out of business school, my first job was at General Foods, which at the time was a really well-known consumer packaged goods company that ultimately got acquired by Kraft. And I loved marketing, and I wanted to work in consumer packaged goods. And I was there in the Maxwell House division. I thought I was crushing it. I was responsible for Brim decaffeinated coffee. And I was putting 50-cent coupons inside Reader's Digest and all of those other really important things, but it was kind of fun and entrepreneurial. Because here I am, and I was 22 years old at the time, and I got zillions of dollars of budget and everything. Anyway, I decided to move back to Boston to get married. And so I had to leave, and people were really, I knew that everything was going to fall apart. And my last day at work, I was in a room, and they're having a little party for me, and somebody goes, speech, speech, speech. So I stood up, and I had been sitting where you are, Dan. I stood up in front of the room, and the guy who was going to take my job, who was going to move into my role, sat in my seat. He slithered into my seat, and I thought, they're not going to miss me. They're not going to miss me. I mean, here, I feel like I've been doing such a great job, and they are going to miss me for about the time it took for me to get up there and some other super competent person to move into my seat. And I tucked that in the back of my mind because I thought, I want to look in the mirror in the morning and say, I don't know what they'd do without me. And what I learned over the years, and I've got so many stories like this, but what I've learned over the years is that I just wanted to, part of the way that you can do something where you really feel you're mattering is to create something on your own. And that really became my dream. I worked in companies that had terrible cultures and terrible bosses, and I realized that if I wanted to work in the kind of company that I always wanted to work in, that I could build it myself. So that was really my motivation for becoming an entrepreneur. The company that I'm known for, Communispace, actually has almost 20 people from Northeastern working there. We absolutely love Northeastern grads. They're amazing and experienced, and they're great thinkers, and they're passionate. And what we basically do is we help organizations listen to and collaborate with and get inspiration from their consumers, which is a good thing to do, because if you can walk in the shoes of your consumers, as you all know, you can grow your business faster. We basically do that all online by building these online communities that serve kind of as an advisory board that's going on all the time for clients. We're now all over the world. We've got about 550 people, and we're right in downtown Boston, right near South Station. And last spring, I decided that everything was going so well that it might not be as much fun anymore. The offices are beautiful. The leadership team was fabulous. We do a lot of stuff that's really great. And I was sitting in a leadership team meeting one day, and they were so capable, and I thought, I don't know, like maybe I have another chapter. Maybe I need to do something else. So I ended up moving aside and becoming chairman. I promoted somebody from my leadership team to become CEO. And I decided to kind of do that and look for my next chapter. My advice, very briefly, was say no to everything, because you're going to get a lot of phone calls. Just say no, or you won't do anything transformational. I kept saying no to that, no, 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 no. I was about to say no to something. I called a friend of mine, and I said, I'm about to say no to this company unless you tell me it's great, because she was an investor in the company. We decided no. She said to me, but I know of something else where they're looking for a CEO. You might be interested. I said, what's that? She said, Startup Institute. And I went, oh, You're kidding. I mean, how cool would that be to be in a really mission-driven company, to be a little bit closer? Doing good. Startup Institute's core program is basically a boot camp for people who want to work in startups, and we network them into the community and do all this cool stuff. But anyway,
we need it. So.
Well, the funny thing is, what did I do after I heard about it? I said no. It was just too early. It wasn't working for me and everything. And the following day, I had a drink with a friend of mine named Sherry Oberg, who had just sold her biotech company. And Sherry was looking to do something new. And I said, well, tell me what you want to do. She said, I want to be in the education space. I said, I know of an opening. There's something that it was a little bit too early for me, but I told her about Startup Institute, and she said, oh, that sounds so fabulous. I would love to meet the board. And I said, great, I'll connect you on email. And I walked out, and I got into my car, and I'm driving home, and I thought, I'll be damned if I'm going to let Sherry Oberg run that company. So that's my story. I am in week 3 of my new job in the next generation education space. And sometimes it's fun, and sometimes I kind of look in the mirror and I go, oh my God, what have I done? So that's my story.
So we have the doctor, we have the businesswoman, and now we have the creative. So, Jules?
Sure, thank you. I guess I'm the funny person, too. Good storyteller. I think the most important thing about my journey is that I have no business being here on stage. At least it didn't look like it in the early part of my life. I grew up in Detroit, the daughter of an auto worker and a stay-at-home mom, bank teller. And I was the first person in my family to go to college. And growing up in a situation where expectations were really, really low, really high in one way, in that I was expected to be a good person. That's a high expectation. But everything else was up for grabs, and there was no expectation whatsoever except to carry my own weight. And that's kind of a gift, actually, for doing things like being an entrepreneur, because there's actually no role model. There's no expectation. There's no shoes that I needed to fill ever. And I realized over time that that was a fantastic thing in my life. So I ended up testing myself from a pretty young age. The most entrepreneurial thing I did was I sent myself to boarding school, honestly. I when I was 14, I was anticipating going to a pretty tough high school. And I talked to a teacher about going to an exam school in Detroit, kind of like Boston Latin. And she said, that'd be great, but there's this other place. And long story short, I got myself a scholarship and went. And that was the scariest thing I've ever done since. Nothing compares to waking up nauseous every morning, knowing that everybody else knows more than you know. And it was true. I mean, I wasn't imagining that. It was true. So this is relatively easier to start a company in terms of my. But I think about that, though, in terms of a lot of people want to be entrepreneurs, and they think that they have to have a lightning bolt that will hit them, and they'll have the perfect idea, and they'll know they're right, and they know they're cut out for it. I'm an entrepreneur in residence at Harvard Business School, and the insecurity around those decisions is endemic. It's a hard decision, right, to start anything. And I always think, look back at what you did you picked the harder choice when there was an easier one. It would have been easier for me to go to my local public school. And there were a zillion things that I did like that, where I tested myself, survived, and gained that little inch of confidence every single time. So maybe fast forward my career, I've got 3 chunks in my career. I was an industrial designer. That's the creative part. I guess I own that. I worked in big companies, and I've done 3 startups. So my big company stuff was stuff you'd know, like Hasbro, KED, StrideRite, a couple computer companies, a couple overseas. And my startups were Continuum, which is a product innovation consultancy right out of business school, and Ziggs, which you wouldn't have heard of because we competed with LinkedIn, and they won. Totally lost. But and then this company, and the insight for this company was actually in my big company phase. A lot of people think also that big company is just a ridiculous detour from entrepreneurship. You can learn a lot in big companies. And one of the things I observed was way back in the 90s at Play School, I was adjacent to the product development team, and they would come up with these amazing ideas for infants and toddlers. And I'd see these fantastic toys that the world should see. And then after a month or 2 or 3, they would fall off the table and we'd be still producing the same toys from last year with a different color or whatever. And I'd say, what happened to that toy? And the answer was always the same. It was Target, Walmart, Kmart, Toys R Us didn't want it. And what was happening was that our retail systems got really, really consolidated. And we used to have this sort of ladder of healthy growth from the product's birth, whether it's big company or small, to Main Street, to regional chains, to national specialty stores, and then maybe the big guys, if you could get there. And a lot of those rungs on the ladder were getting broken, even for big companies. We could not get our cool products placed. And I was just so mad when I realized that. I walked around basically mad for 10 years over that because it was so wrong that the best products weren't winning. And fast forward to when I ran a social network, and I actually saw a way to actually take that power back by creating a community that made those decisions rather than buyers at large retailers. They're not evil, those people, by the way. They have tough jobs. But let's do the job we want done. That's what I decided in starting the Grommet. So every day at noon, we launch a product with a video. We've looked at 200 ideas every week to launch the 6 or 7 that we do launch. We launch at noon. By 1 p.m., we know exactly what America thinks of any unknown product. Nobody in the world does that. We have data, we have qualitative information. We have a lot of important stuff to help that company on its path to success. So we've launched some famous things like Fitbit. I'm wearing one.
Me too.
SodaStream. We've launched Bananagrams. A lot of people really love that game.
That's great.
If you're in a startup, you might have Idea Paint on your wall. That came right out of Babson students. And what we're launching today is the future. So pay attention to what we're doing now. Every single day, you'll see the future if you pay attention to what we're launching at the Grommet.
Thank you. So each of you has a slightly different story, have faced different challenges, different paths. But maybe each of you could tell a story about a challenge that you've overcome to get to where you are.
Like which
You have
one
Vanessa.
do you choose from? So, I mean, I think to speak a little bit, this is a little bit about what our story is and how we've arrived, or the ability to sort of be an entrepreneur. And I think if we're going to speak, I think one of the big challenges for me was that I trained as a physician. It's interesting when you're listening to you sort of talk about the idea of always knowing what your path was. In some ways, when you're a physician, you have to know what your path is because you go to medical school. You have to finish your pre-med requirements. It's a pretty prescripted path. But what I think I learned along the way was that there's still a lot of choices within that path that one can make. Do you become a surgeon, or a pediatrician, an obstetrician, or an internal medicine doctor? Do you do what I did? You take 2 years off before you go to medical school. You work on a ranch and for a photographer, taking pictures of pets with Santa Claus at Christmas, and then buy your one-way ticket around the world and travel for $5 a day and really discover how the world lives, which was a very life-changing moment for me before I went to medical school. I took 6 years to go through medical school, which someone tried to tell me was the remedial path, and I almost punched them in the face, but that's a story for another time. And I did that because life happened. My mother got sick. Many of you probably know this already. My father is John Kerry and Secretary of State, and he ran for president in 2004, and that was a life-changing moment that I wanted to be a part of, and certainly had a huge influence on me. I decided to go get a master's in public health. And so the journey does zigzag as you go along. And I think that So for me, the challenge was realizing I was a physician and deciding that I wanted to start an organization that was going to be about social change. I realized I actually was starting a business. And I shouldn't say I had no idea. I have no idea how to run a business. And it's been very humbling for me to understand, because as a doctor, you really want to be in control. I want to promise you as my patient, I am in control and I know what's happening. And when you are starting a business, that is not the case at all. And you are really trying to rely on other people to help guide you. And so that's been a huge challenge, to sort of learn trying to identify that I don't know what I don't know, and making sure that I have the partners in place to help me recognize that you really don't know this. And so that we can build that. The other really realistic challenge that I've had, and it's going to at first sound like nobody else would have this challenge, but hear me out for a second, is that by being the daughter of a prominent person, a lot of people assume that I have connections. A lot of people assume that things have happened for me. And don't get me wrong, I am grateful for the opportunities I've had in my life, and I'm not going to pretend that I've had a hard knock life in any way, shape, or form. But I do want to say that it presents a different kind of challenge, because it's also been really critically important that this work, especially because it's government funded, got created entirely independently. And that meant that I couldn't talk to my father about anything I did. I couldn't share with him what I was doing. And I certainly wasn't going to let him help me, which is, I think, very difficult for him too. As a father, you want to help your kid. And so he would get very frustrated, but he didn't really know anything. And just as a side note, when he was getting vetted for Secretary of State, he called me up laughing and he goes, "Guess what I got to ask today?" And I said, "Oh, if you knew anything about Seed Global Health." And he started laughing. I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "And guess what I got to say?" And I, of course, used an expletive, but you knew blanking nothing. And he started laughing. He goes, "Exactly." But it was sort of a proud moment for us both, because I had created this program that was now a internationally recognized nonprofit that has been called by the President of Malawi as the missing link of healthcare delivery. Not because I relied on any help, but because was thoughtful with my friends and partners and colleagues about what needed to happen. We learned about why this had never happened before, despite the clear need. We looked at the times that people tried to start it, and we looked at why it failed, and we figured out how to design this in a way that it wouldn't fail this time, and it filled some of those niches. And most importantly, we just hit the grindstone and looked for every opportunity to make this happen. And the reason this program came into existence is because we went to a public forum with 3 former Peace Corps directors and the then current director. And we asked anonymously, we stood up, we raised our hand, and we said, "What do you think about the Peace Corps sending doctors and nurses abroad to be medical and nursing educators, providing technical capacity, and really living out President Kennedy's original vision?" These people didn't know who we were from a hole in the wall, and they said, "It's a great idea." I don't think they counted on us elbowing our way to the front of the room saying, "Hey, great, here's our card. When do we come to DC and talk about it?" But that actually is the moment that Seed Global Health got created. And it happened not because of connections, and this is where I'm saying the story is relevant to everyone, but it happened because we just learned everything we could. We looked for the opportunity, and we decided that we were going to find a way in a strategic and thoughtful way to implement change. And then we just went about knocking on doors and finding the opportunities until it resonated with someone. And I think that that was a really important message for us, that, there is always a path forward. It may not always be clear, but if you put you really know the environment in which you're working and what has failed and not worked before, it gives you the courage to take the chance to find a path forward that no one's tried. And you may fail, but then you kind of bump, you reroute, and you go back. So all this is to say that the zigzags are worth it, and that, that there is opportunity there. And sometimes it just takes a lot of scrambling to find, to thread that needle, but it's there.
Thank you. That was great. Jules, you want to go next?
Challenge?
Yeah, challenge.
I told her I didn't have any challenges.
I think every startup has some range of challenges. I think if it's not really hard the first year or two, you probably wouldn't feel like you earned it. And in some companies, it might be competition. Somebody starts to eat your lunch. It might be a legal challenge. It might be a natural disaster, something that you just didn't see coming. Might be lots of things. In ours, it was really one thing. It was funding. It was really hard to fund this company. We started right after Lehman Brothers collapsed, and that's probably most of the story, frankly. But what should have been sort of 1 year of starvation became like 4 years of Dante's Inferno, really. It was hard. And there's a slide deck I'm developing right now to tell the story of the company. And the first slide, there's some people here from my company and some visitors from Tokyo, and they're the only people who've actually seen it. And they kind of reacted when I showed them, because the first slide is kind of these kind of public story accolades about the Grommet. And then the second slide is what I'm really proud of, and it's a picture of 2 cockroaches. And I say, I'm really proud that we survived, that my co-founder and I and the team, we have the tenacity of the cockroach. But that middle phase was really hard in terms of every day we're doing really wonderful work, launching a new company, seeing us make a difference for those companies. There are companies like IdeaPaint would say, we would not exist without you. And so we were on one hand doing really good work, and on the other hand, my job as CEO was to keep the company fueled. And it's an operationally intense company that needed capital, and I was not able to create the kind of capital, amass the kind of capital we needed. So this dichotomy of success and, for me, failure every day, where the rest of the team was succeeding and I was failing, was incredibly hard, the hardest thing I've ever done. And there was a lot of personal cost. I had company in many ways. So, tough moments were when I asked my oldest son to get emergency financial aid so he could stay in school. I mean, we were at that extent of personal sacrifice. And when the company finally got great financing and we've soared, we've grown 900% in the last 2 years. 1 in 200 Americans follows us. We have a huge impact and are really doing what we always knew we could do. But when we got that financing, my youngest son said, "Oh, we get to keep our house?" And oh my God, I was trying so hard to protect those boys. I have 3 boys, and obviously failing at protecting them from that risk. But they, in some ways, were really important to my tenacity themselves, because at one point we had 3 sort of near-death experiences. And at one point, that son, that same boy, when I was sort of like head slumped on the counter, which is unusual. I'm not like that. I'm pretty much the Everardi bunny. But it was one of those head slumped on the counter moments where I actually felt I needed to tell him. I didn't know if I could pull it out. He gave me like you guys won't know this because you're too young, but the famous coach of Notre Dame, Newt Rockne, there's like a Newt Rockne speech you can give. He doesn't know. He gave me a Newt Rockne speech of like, "Get up, Mom. What do you always tell us?" And I did, and we pulled it out, and I'm very happy. It's been a beautiful thing for the last couple of years. But getting through what was effectively an unfair challenge in fundraising was very personally challenging.
Aren't you glad I asked you to go last?
Do you want to do anything else within it?
I was going to say my other challenge is being a working mom. So I was going to add that, but I am have to sneak out.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything.
So I'll let you guys, why don't I take this opportunity just to thank everyone. I am really sorry. This kills me to have to leave. I'm a little mortified.
We'll just have to have you come back.
That sounds like a great plan. But I want to just thank you for letting me join you and for being willing to listen a little bit to my story. And I am very humbled by who I'm sharing the stage with. And it's been a pleasure to hear from both of you as well. So thank you. And I'm so sorry.
And Vanessa, I just want to say thank you also for being here. But if there's any students in the room who's looking for a co-op, is that a possibility?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And I'm more than willing to answer questions or to talk to people after this. And I'm so sorry.
We'll have you come back.
The reality of young.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thanks so much.
It is interesting, isn't it? You get, Jules and I are friends, and I have such huge admiration for what she's done and her company. And you see someone who had very little direction from her parents. On the other side, you see John Kerry's daughter, and I think it's just so interesting You know, it's not about your parents and your upbringing and all of that. There's a whole continuum. Of course, if we had 10 women sitting here, we'd all have different stories. You know, all of that. So it's really striking to me. Challenges, you know, same thing. I do think, you know, near-death experiences, employee fraud, all of that. I guess the biggest challenge we had was what, from a clinical point of view, you call product market fit. So we started Communispace at the turn of the century. And the pundits used to say that the internet, literally, think about where you were in the year 2000. That's when people were talking about what the internet was going to mean. The pundits used to say the 3 C's, content, commerce, community. Pamela's heard this thing so many times she could do it. And I was really, you know, we all know what e-commerce is. Content was just all the information in the world will be at your fingertips, but community was really in its infancy. And what I find interesting is that if you're American and you're a grown-up, most of us had the exact same first experience with community, which is that we had an AOL account. Are you guys all too young to have had an AOL account? Did you have one? All right. All right. So if you're a student here, you probably had a really horrible screen name, which you got rid of at some point when you realized that no one would let you into college with that screen name. But it is interesting that one of the things that we all have in common in our combined generation is that we all remember that moment when you just kind of get online and you start having conversation with people who you don't know. And your first time you do it, it's a little weird. And then it becomes really natural and so interesting. And I just fell in love with what the possibilities were of community on the internet, and I wanted to apply that like for serious business purposes. So our idea was that for large companies, we would build communities of employees who were scattered all over the world so that they could come to a place, and even though they weren't physically together, they could share best practices with each other. And this was such a great idea that I hired a software engineer, a guy named Paul Morrison. He built me a little prototype, and I went out and sold it to Unilever, to Sara Lee, and to Chase Manhattan Bank, which is now part of JP Morgan. And with that, because it was the year 2000 and not the year that Lehman Brothers went under, I raised venture capital really quickly. And one of the reasons I raised it is that the year 2000, it was the wild, wild west. Like, I had revenue, and most of the companies that were raising money then were going, well, you know, our sales are going to start here, and they're going to go like this. Now, we have no sales yet. We are pre-revenue. That's literally what they used to say, we're pre-revenue, and they'd still get these wild valuations. So we raised venture capital. We bought a foosball table. We were all excited. We started doing all this stuff. We're building up our software and everything. And we were off and running. And we had multiple problems, lots more competition than we thought we'd have. But the big problem was we had a hard time getting anybody to use our communities. So as an example, we were at Chase Manhattan Bank. We were building for them an online community of all of their HR people, 200 of them all over the world. And they get together physically once every 2 years. And what we were going to do was they were getting together on Wall Street, and I was their final speaker. And we were going to basically say, hey, everybody, just think. You know, you're all going to go back to your respective places, but we're going to build you something so that you can actually figuratively be together all the time and help each other with ideas and getting advice and everything else. They were so excited about the Chase online HR network that they gave us a standing ovation. So, of course, we get on a Acela on the way home. We are like ordering drinks, slapping each other five. I mean, you know, we got a standing ovation about our idea. The following week, we launched the Chase HR network. Welcome to these 200 people. And at the end of week 1, how many of the 200 came into the community? 7. So I think, jet lag, they're tired, they have a lot going on at the office, we'll give them another week. End of that week, 8. We tried everything. I mean, we called them on the phone. We had people, I mean, I cannot tell you how many creative strategies I came up with to try to get people to use this software, and we could not get over the number 14. And it was a huge challenge. Of course, you're the optimistic entrepreneur, but I did have one of these voices in the back of my head saying, I might need to go become a consultant or, do something that you do when you're not really sure what else you can do. So we had a lucky day. We were in Kansas City. We were at Hallmark. And Hallmark was about to launch an online community of all of their Gold Crown store managers who were going to share ideas with each other about how to improve the profitability of their stores, do better merchandising, etc. And the client, who's a guy named Tom Brailsford, looked at me and said, Diane, I love what you guys are doing, but I'm just worried that our store managers aren't going to come into the community. So I said, I'm worried they're not going to come in either. And my heart just sank because, sometimes you just have to be honest, but I think this is the end. He said, I think I have a better idea than what you're doing. He said, think about it. We're a card company. We're kind of screwed. I'm worried that people aren't going to buy and send cards anymore. And he said, we have to completely transform Hallmark. So if instead of the store managers, what do you think about bringing our target consumers in here? Like, most of our customers are moms, especially moms with little kids. I don't know, maybe we could invite moms in and we could run ideas by them and we could learn about their lives and they could help us transform Hallmark into the future. What do you think? Well, to make a long story short, I had actually done something like that in a previous life. I had written a book about how you grow your company by focusing on your customers. I had done a lot of that, but I wasn't doing that anymore because I was doing my startup. And so I said to him, Tom, I actually know something about listening to consumers and everything. Anyway, we go back to Boston. I tell everybody we're not launching the Hallmark Gold Crown Store Managers Network. Instead, we're doing this other thing. We had no idea what we were doing. Everybody's saying, Diane, where are we going to find the moms? I'm saying, well, I'm a mom. I know. We literally had no idea. But basically, Hallmark really helped us. And in November of 2000, we launched the Hallmark Idea Exchange for Parents, which was an online community of 197 moms, most of whose names I remember, and 3 stay-at-home dads. And at the end of day 1, we had 82 people come into the community. And I will tell you that what the company is doing now is a much fancier version of that, but it changed everything. It worked. And there are so many lessons for that for me. One is sometimes when you're an entrepreneur, you fall so in love with your idea that it's hard for you to listen to people who are saying, I don't know, I just don't know if it's going to work. And I think I was lucky that it was just one of those days when I just took a deep breath and I thought maybe something else showed up. And, the other thing is I'm just a big believer in serendipity. I think I am where I am because of somebody I met on a train or somebody I met at a cocktail party or somebody my roommate introduced me to or whatever. And I think it's great to wake up in the morning and go, today could be a day. Today could be one of those days when everything changes. It's a great way to live life, to think this could be it. Like maybe tonight in this room, there's somebody here whose life is going to change because of somebody else you meet. I just think that's so cool. Now, believe me, the community worked well. We went to our board. We changed our plan. The board loved the new idea. 3 days later, the internet bubble burst. Everything fell apart. We almost went out of business. We ended up working at in office space near Bugaboo Creek Steakhouse. We had a moose out in the front. It was completely depressing. Our cockroaches were as strong as Jules was. We ran out of, we almost went out of business twice. We did have a massive case of employee fraud where at one point early on we thought we were a $2.5 million company. We were a $1.5 million company. But the other lesson is your tough times build your character. They really do. You have tough times in your personal life, and it changes you. It changes you forever. And if you have tough times in business, people say, why is your culture so good at Communispace? It's because, You know, we're so grateful. We're so grateful that after all of the bullshit and all of the pain and the fear that we all had, that it wasn't going to work. Like, not that we'd be unemployed. Like, the worst thing that happens is you get a job. But we were so afraid that there was something that we loved that wasn't going to work. And we're so grateful that it did, that it's like, I mean, every single day at Communispace, even though I left, every single day I'd walk around. I mean, literally 10 years after that, I'd walk around and I still couldn't believe it. So it's good. I mean, the greatness of being an entrepreneur is that you can be resilient enough to get through all of that, and it changes your perspective forever. You don't have to be at the top, but just being in a startup and trying to build something and making yourself vulnerable just teaches you really, really wonderful lessons.
I have these moments in my company where I'll like look around, and I really like when people are interacting or laughing or having fun or socializing. I mean, that they really enjoy being together, or I see people like they're, you know, the steam coming out of the ears trying to solve a problem, whatever it is. And I'll have this like thing like where I'll say to myself, geez, if I were going to start a company, I want to be like this one. And then I'll go, I did.
Yeah.
Oh, it's my company. And it's such a great thing because there's so many, negative things you could focus on in terms of, especially as a woman, in terms of pay discrepancy and, you know, all the things that we know that we don't like in the world. And like my answer is, well, then just start a company, you know? If we just start them as women or as anyone who would like things to be the way they think they should be, it doesn't have to do with gender, just start a company because then you get to decide those things. And that doesn't mean you're perfect and that you don't have your own blind sides, but the things you know need to be fixed, you can fix. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's so true. I'm listening to Jules' story, and I walk through the hallways of her company, and it's extraordinary what they're doing there. I want her to hire me, but she didn't offer me a job. But it's really amazing. You should go to that site. I'm doing all my Christmas shopping on the Grommet. Just literally, it's just so cool. I've learned that there are two types of entrepreneurs. One, I have a lot of friends who call themselves serial entrepreneurs, and what they do is they love like building value and then flipping it. So it's like they build an app and then they sell it to PayPal. They don't care how much. Sometimes it's big, but sometimes it's like $200,000. But they build that, and then they get another idea, and they build that, and they flip that, and they love just how fast can I build something that adds value, and then I'll flip it and do something else. That's not me, and I don't think Jules is that way either.
I'm a one-trick pony.
Yeah. Well, I'm not. So you're worse than I am because I'm not a one-trick pony. But my motivation was, I worked in a couple of other companies, and I remember in my old companies, I was senior management, but I wasn't at the top, and I would sit in the cafeteria with my friends, like the people who I really loved, and I'd say, Corey, you know, it would be really fun. How about, think about how much fun it would be if we started a company and we brought Kate, and Jules and Dan and Pamela, and we had no jerks. I actually didn't. I didn't use the word jerks, but I've used enough profanity tonight. But imagine if we just built something that we loved, and it was all the people who we thought were the best. Wouldn't that be great? And my friends would not say, let's go do it. My friends would say, Diane, if you ever do that, call me. And I'll come. And I realized that was my dream. That I literally used to think about what I do. I would think about walking through the halls of the kind of company that I always wanted to work in and how proud I would feel. And that's a different kind of entrepreneur, that what you're trying to do is to build an enterprise that lasts and matters. And I don't think any one of them, is necessarily more legitimate than the other. But I think that if you feel like you want to do, you should know that it comes in all different flavors. It's not like you got to, build the app, sell it to Twitter, and
And
and then
also
go
when
find
you
some more
join the
funding.
company, you can still be an entrepreneur, not necessarily the founder, but be part of that experience and be critical to the growth of that company. And I'm thinking specifically of my mentor. My mentor, the person I work for in 3 companies, is Meg Whitman, the woman who ended up running eBay, then running for governor of California. Now she's running Hewlett Packard. And at one stage, when we were dealing with too many turkeys, I remember going to her house in Brookline in the kitchen and saying, "Meg, we need to let's put on a show. Let's do this a little bit like you like." And I was kind of coming up with criteria, and she rightly said to me, "Jules, I'm not that person. I'm the person who needs to come in when there's a little bit of bulk, and I can kind of direct the troops. I can't do that like with 2 people." And she was right. She went to eBay when it was, I don't remember. I could have gone, and I'd probably not be here. I'd be on an island somewhere. But to me, it was like already kind of far gone when she went there. And but it was right for her. It was right to do that.
I think that it's time to open this up to all of you, and if you have burning questions or comments or opportunities for these 2 special women.
I have just a quick question, and the thing is, what we see not only at the university but all over the country. My favorite topic, Dan, is there aren't a lot of women going into entrepreneurship. I think, a lot of women are going more on the social entrepreneurship side, which is understandable, but we are trying to find out what it takes and why aren't women going into entrepreneurship, and what advice could you give, and what do you think the reason is behind that?
I might push back a little bit on the thesis in that women do start the majority of companies. Now, I understand there's high visibility, high growth startups and sole proprietorships at the other end, and women do tend to be at the sub $1 million size when they're dominating entrepreneurship. But in my own travels, I find it frustrating that 2 things frustrate me about that topic. One is that I don't think women either seek or get the media spotlight they deserve for what they actually are doing. Even in Boston, there's a group called the CEOs. There are a zillion women CEOs in Boston. There are 150 in that group alone. But for whatever reason, we're not seen as that prototype, and not, the extra effort it might take to sort of make us show up at a night like this or get on a magazine cover isn't happening as frequently as it should. And there's a study coming out at our alma mater, actually, Harvard Business School, of the 50 most powerful women entrepreneurs. And I looked at the list, the sort of draft list, and I didn't know most of the names. I should, because I think about this stuff a lot, and I didn't know most of the names. So for whatever reason, we don't know these women, and I'm excited for that list to come out. And the school did it partly because people were calling them up thinking they had that list, that list existed. It didn't exist. So they did some hard work to make it happen. The other thing that, my theme about fundraising isn't my own theme. We had a tough timing issue, no question. But it is true. There's a new study out of Babson, a refresh of the Diane project, and women are only getting 2.7% of venture capital in the country. And if women were only being admitted to universities at that level, we'd be in the streets protesting. And I do believe that access to capital and access to entrepreneurship is as important as access to education, because it creates the world we live in. As much as anything else we do, companies determine the world we live in. And so that is criminal. And that's something that I also personally am working on a lot to try to change, because 20% of the GDP in the country is created by those venture-funded companies. And so they're not, even though the funding that goes to venture capital, it's only 1% of companies that get venture capital, the impact of those companies is super important, and the role models that they create and the media personalities and archetypes that they serve up are super important, and it's a major obstacle.
I guess I would add, I think women do have a different narrative in their heads, many of us. My male counterparts at least appear way more confident and way more decisive. I mean, I cannot tell you, now if I mentor people, I look at their presentation and the guys, their revenue line on their startup goes like this. And the women go like this, and for the exact same business. And I don't think that means anybody's lying. It's just, you say to a guy, you say to a woman, you think we should do A, B, or C? And I think what we do, and I'm guilty here, although I'm working on it, is women are very genuine. So we'll say, well, I think this is a really hard decision. I mean, let me make it more tangible. Honey, should I wear the red dress or the black dress? This is a terrible question to ask a man because he cannot get it right. You say, wear the red dress. What will I say?
Oh, I wanted to wear the black
You don't like the black? No. And what we want is, we want you to say, well, I think this is like a really hard decision. I mean, on one hand, think about the party. Like the black is so elegant, and and yet the red, you'll stand out. You look so beautiful in that with your dark hair. And, I don't know, like what kind of mood are you? I mean, we want to do that. But in business, that doesn't work because somebody will say, you think we should do A, B, or C? And what we want to do is to say, well, I don't know. I mean, like on one hand, A, blah, 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 and then there's B, and then there's C. And, we're doing it, and the guys at the table are like going, oh, my God, you've got to be kidding. And what men do, which cracks me up, is you'll go, do you think it's A, B, or C? And the guys will go, B, it's obvious. And I think, you've got to be kidding. You're just faking it. But I think the same thing happens in starting businesses. Like you say to guys, well, you think you're like really ready to be an entrepreneur because you're 12 years old. And the guy will go, you've got to be kidding. I've got 12 years of experience, I'm the oldest child, I've run my family, I had a lemonade stand, I'm like totally ready to go. And you would look at me, I mean, I didn't start Communispace till I was 43. And I always thought I needed to like marinate more. I didn't know if, somebody would say, well, are you ready? And it's like, well, I've only managed 1,000 people. I keep thinking maybe, like if I managed 5,000, by then I'd have it all figured out. I mean, I had all kinds of excuses for why I needed to just be really ready. Now, I will say the benefit was, by the time I started the Communispace, I was really confident as a leader. I felt that I had seen everything. I understood strategy. I could look at any spreadsheet and in 2 seconds understand what was going on in the business. So I do think I was a more successful entrepreneur because I did it when I was older, at least in my business. But I do admire my male friends, and I really, really try to not just have female mentors because men teach me that sometimes you have to sit in a room and just take a deep breath and say, look, I know this is a hard decision, but we need to do B. And it's really fun to practice that, and I don't think we do that for ourselves. We need to marinate. We need to think it through. But it's not about capability. So is it about education? I think it's about confidence. I think it's about lowering the bar on what you think you need to be successful. I think it's about having people who can help you see that, what's the worst thing that happens? No one will ever give you money that can't afford to give you money. They just won't. And the worst thing that happens is you get a job. It really is. There are many reasons. There are many things that are scary about being an entrepreneur, but none of them is that you feel like you're taking a lot of risk. you worry if the company goes belly up. You worry about having to tell your clients. You worry about if the economy's bad, having to put your employees on the street and all that. But you don't worry like, oh, I'm going to lose $82 zillion and I'll never work in this town again. So I think we need to help women. Like at Communispace, my goal is I'm trying to get 100 CEOs out of the company. And I say that all the time. And there are a lot of women who will look at me and go, I'm going to be one of those. I'm going to be one of those. So I think we just need to help each other because I think we're wired differently and we're wired to wait and to be more cautious for the most part.
Great, let's get a couple more questions. Anybody else want to line up that's got a question? And we have a on this side.
So thank you so much. Is this on? Can you hear me? Grommet is one of my favorite companies on the planet. So. It's seriously mind-blowing. It's awesome. I teach social venture creation, and most of my students that actually end up launching stuff are women. So it's really exciting to see that. My quick question for you guys was, Porter's Shared Value Initiative is really trying to change the way businesses are run and how they value themselves and teams and all of that. And just wanted to get your thoughts on two powerful women in the corporate space on that initiative and where you think women's roles could be, which is really the sort of academic practitioner that space in between, where he's really taking the academics and applying it to the practitioner space. And what can we as women entrepreneurs and women leaders, because I think while there are definitely a lot of barriers we have to get through as women in terms of our thinking and confidence, I do think the women's leadership style is really going to save us. I think the way that women run businesses is smarter and more sustainable and more balanced. I come from a family of women entrepreneurs, so I have a little bit of empirical evidence. So yeah, it is. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Where can we take the shared value idea as women and own it a little bit more?
I don't know what that is. Sorry. What? So do you, Diane? I haven't heard about this.
I mean, I know a little bit about it, but do you want to describe it just so everybody here knows?
Plug for Porter.
It's just the idea is that the triple bottom line and sustainable and socially responsible investing and all of those ideas that are embedded in ESG and other metrics in companies really should look at instead of modern portfolio theory, the role of the firm within the whole of society, and that the values within society should be embedded in the team and in the firm, and that you should really be looking at those kind of more holistic sustainability metrics, including human sustainability, when you're running a company.
Oh, okay. I'm all over that. I just never heard that term. I mean, for me, business is even though you called me the creative, I think of a business as my craft, really. And I admire NGOs. I admire educational institutions. I admire everybody who's trying to do what they need to do. But business has this huge advantage in terms of speed and resources. So we have an even huger responsibility to care about what we do, all those things that you just said. And what I love and what makes me optimistic is that I see this collision between two generations that I don't think's ever happened before, which is a collision between the millennial generation and the baby boomer generation in terms of some shared values that may not even be articulated the same way, but the baby boomer generation, or just older people in general, get a bit more spiritual anyway, think a little bit more about legacy, think a little bit more about experience versus consumption. But the baby boomers as a generation also had some kind of let's do things better values, but they were more anarchic, I guess, throwing things over and rejecting business, rejecting for-profit institutions. And where the millennial generation has it right and is colliding nicely with the baby boomer generation is that the millennials understand that making for a for-profit company is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with capitalism, but they have a higher expectation. My general reaction to the people I know in that generation is they expect, well, who are you? What's behind your company? I'll support you in you making a profit, but I need to know that you're creating the world I want to live in as well. The human capital side, the sort of additive approach to business, not always taking but adding to the world. So for me, that's kind of natural, and I don't even I sort of see the lines blurring almost between social venture and for-profit if you think about that as a leader right from the start in a for-profit business. And obviously the companies we launch, many of them, since you're a fan, lost track where you are there, many of them are social ventures that are for-profit, but they have a social component that really matters, and it's totally natural to them that they wouldn't start the business any other way. It's the way they think, these entrepreneurs.
I think that in order to have a great social venture, you need to be really, really good at business. I mean, what Vanessa's doing is so extraordinary. And I think it's kind of funny that all she wanted to do was to kind of pick our brains on how she could scale her business, because if you have a great social idea, but you can't scale it, and you can't figure out the right business model, then you have a nice little social venture. And there are millions of those. There are millions of little places making a difference, and you can be one more. But if you add business perspective to it, it changes everything. And I think the same thing is true of business. I mean, the thing that I love about having built a successful business and, sold it and had an exit, which we did in 2011, is we are able to have we had a big economic impact on the city of Boston. We are able to do a tremendous amount in the community. Everybody gets 3 volunteer days a year. People are really, really involved in other things. We try to be as generous as we possibly can. We do pro bono stuff, everything else. I'm able to, be more generous. So I think the key here is, and I know it sounds like we ought to have triple bottom lines, but I think the key is to create something as big and high impact as possible. And obviously you want to do that with integrity. You want to care about the world. You don't want to mess up the environment in the process. But if you can create something, if you can dream big and create something big, you can have very big impact on society no matter what the business is. And if you're creating something small, whether it's a social venture or whether it's a more traditional business venture, you can kind of feel good, but it won't have the kind of impact you want. So what I think we need to do, if we want to really help the world, I think we have to not be afraid to create things that are substantial in their size.
I think a lot of people, and this might be also maybe a more female thing, people think that they can have a better element of control if it's small. It's not true. It's the same amount of work to do something that's small as large, and some things get a lot easier as it grows. My own job is really different from when we had 10 people. Now we have 55 plus. It's way different. I can be much more impactful in ways that I couldn't even get to certain topics or certain areas before.
I think that we've probably run out of time. Maybe our panelists can.
Let's see if there's any more last questions. Anybody burning?
Yeah, I got one.
Excellent.
Okay.
A man.
So Diane, I really liked what you said about the people you were talking to and saying, if you ever do that, call me up because I'd love to join you. We think a lot about, or me personally, I think a lot about co-founding teams. As someone who works with entrepreneurs and someone who aspires to be an entrepreneur. So how do you find co-founders? And wrapped up into that is, how do you find female co-founders?
Ooh. Well, how'd you find your co-founder? How'd you find Joanne?
Joanne and I worked together. Actually, we worked together at KEDS. She was VP of Product Development, and I watched her work ethic, her character, the way she protected that company fiercely. And it was a big company. It's hard to care about a big company like your own enterprise, and she did. And then we shared a nanny as well. And it's really interesting. You can see the character of a person through their children in a way. And so in some ways we're not deep personal friends in that we don't spend a lot of personal time together, but I had that interaction with her children, and I've always used to say, like, her oldest son, Alex, same age as my oldest son, Dane. And Alex and Dane, if they went down in the basement together, and I wouldn't worry at all, whereas opposed like to Jonathan across the street, no, like, no going down in the basement, not you two. And, that taught me a lot about her on the other side, how she was as a person. So that was easy. But my son started a company recently, and he's trying to find a co-founder, and it's not easy. He's used Founder Dating, the new site. Yeah, it's not romantic. And it's really interesting because I don't think you should do this without a co-founder. It's way too lonely and hard. When you're up, the other person's down. It kind of goes like that, and that's important. And as I help him with the business, it's been sort of my number one requirement that he get a co-founder, because I'm not worried about failure. I'm not worried about a lot of things about the business, but having a co-founder is kind of fundamental in my book. So I appreciate the question. I didn't give you any magic answers, though. Sorry about that.
And you didn't have a co-founder.
I didn't have a co-founder, but I hired a bunch of people that I had worked with before. So in many ways, I had like 5 co-founders. I mean, literally the minute that we raised our money, I called Corey and Kate. I literally called the people that I used to talk to. In fact, in Startup Institute, I've already got 2 of those with me that, were out doing other things already. So I think you gotta know the people. If you're a Northeastern student and you're an entrepreneur, you're looking for a co-founder, go to those entrepreneur club meetings, because your co-founder is way more likely to be in that room, than not. I look for friends who you think you can trust, who are really, really as passionate as you are, and who have complementary skills. It's great to think about, are you an outside guy or an inside guy? I'm an outside guy, although culture is really important to me. But for the most part, I thought that my skill was more on the outside. So I needed somebody who was more left brain and more operational to make the donuts. So ask yourself those questions, and then, look for, where you can have compatibility. For me, I think it's not just about finding a great co-founder. I think every hire you make, there's a huge difference between an A player and a B player. We all make mistakes.
I once referred someone who was applying for a role at Communispace, and you reached out to me and asked for a reference, and he was a B player, and I wrote back, he's a good guy, and you wrote back, good guy's not enough,
Good guy. That was a hint. She was trying to be nice, not do anything illegal.
It was a hint, but she came right back and blasted me, basically. Okay, well, forget it then.
Yeah. I think there's a huge difference. If you hire an A player, that person will transform you.
So
you
what
say,
does it take to be an A
Jules
player?
Came into this company, it was never the same again. So I'm always looking for A players. I walk around all the time going, who's the best salesperson you know? If I'm looking for a great player in sales, I'll say to everybody, who's the best salesperson you know? I call every client that I know. I'm looking for a great salesperson, in whatever, Chicago. Who's the best salesperson you know? Da-da. I remember once I was looking for a salesperson in Chicago, and I had hired a headhunter, and he was sending me junk. B players, C players. And I said to him, I remember this, I said, Mike, I want a great salesperson. I don't want a good salesperson. You're not sending me great. Who is the best person in this industry in the city of Chicago? He says, well, that's Maria Rapp, but she's really happy in her job, and so she's not going to move. And I said, well, let me just meet her, because I want to know what that person looks like, because I don't know how do you find them. So anyway, I got her. And she was extraordinary, and she's the first call I made when we got venture capital. I brought Maria to Communispace, and she's one of my best friends in the world, and I don't think that I would have made it without her. She opened up every major initial account, and I had to totally overpay her to bring her into the company, and she was worth every dime. So just look for rock stars. Just have that as your goal.
Jeff Bezos has a really simple question. He demands that people answer, will you admire this person? Not will they admire you? And that could be somebody who's fresh out of school. It's nothing about experience, but will you admire this person? And I've adopted that. It was something we learned recently, and it helps me a lot to think that way.
Okay, one last question.
No pressure.
Okay, really enjoyed the the meeting, but my question is, it's important to have big ideas, but we also don't want to overwhelm ourselves with the bigness. And I noticed that a lot of successful companies, they start small and then they get big, they grow. So how do you combine the two? You know, building the company, but having that big idea at the same time.
Well, you want to actually go. It is going to start small. In fact, it's worse than small. It starts out as a blob, an amoeba. There's nothing there, and that's normal. But the big that matters isn't how you start, but what you're heading towards in terms of, is the market big? Because this is the reality. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. Diane talked about some of hers. And if you don't have a big enough target, and it's a really narrow target with a really narrow approach, and you're not quite right, you're hosed. So I want to see that you're solving a really big problem that is urgent and important to that potential customer as well. It's not a nice to have. Like in our business, there are sort of three parties. We have makers, and their biggest problem after they've invented the world's best something is getting people to know about it. That is a hair on fire problem. We also have retailers. We have a wholesale side of our business, and getting great product before anyone else is their competitive edge. That's hair on fire. We have consumers. As much as that nice woman over there loved us, we're not hair on fire problem for a consumer. We really aren't. As much as our community is everything, and we wouldn't exist without our community, it's not hair on fire. So you've got to know that it's really big.
Realize is
It works, yeah.
okay. One thing I realized is you can't be afraid to think, is it something everybody needs? You know, because the reason why Microsoft is huge is because everybody needs a computer. And that's one thing don't be afraid to go there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I always say to people is the easiest thing to do is think about what drives you crazy. You know, people say, oh, I would like to start a company, but I don't have an idea. It's like, I got 50 ideas. Because think about what drives you nuts. If it's in your personal life, it's a B2C idea. If it's something that drives you nuts in your business life, in an organization, it's probably a B2B business. And the way you solve a big problem is that it drives you nuts. And a lot of the big companies out there just solved a very big problem. You know, I've got this formula. It's like, how big is the problem? How much does the solution fix the problem? And then can you execute it, right? So sometimes we're working on a big problem, but we can't kind of get our act together to actually execute. But I think that's a lot of it. And yes, then if there's something that drives you nuts, you figure out how to fix that, and you just keep working away at it. And you make $5 the first time, and then you just keep going. In B2B, the numbers get bigger a little faster because you have companies writing checks. But in B2C, you have an opportunity to serve many more people. But that's the way to start. And it's got to be personal. So if it works for everybody else, but you don't feel like you could eat, sleep, and breathe that problem and that solution every single solitary day, don't do it. So you have to have passion for it, even if not all of your friends think it's a big deal.
I can recommend a couple books for kind of getting in some of this zone. One is I really, really love Founders at Work by Jessica Livingston. She's a reporter. She actually helps to run Y Combinator. It's a series of about 35 stories of what it was like in the really, really early days for a lot of companies, many of which you would know. It's very well told, really great. And then there's a new book I like as well. I'm reading. I'm not quite done, but I can recommend it. It's the new Peter Thiel book called 0 to 1. And you'll see articles it's kind of catchy headlines. Competition is for losers, but it's really short, easy book to read. But I think he's a pretty original thinker, and some of the things are new and some are not. But it's super easy and helps you get a little bit in that zone that we're talking about.
Okay, I'd like all of us to thank our panelists who have informed us. How can we not want to be entrepreneurial after what we've heard tonight, and be a good storyteller and tell some jokes and share some passion? So thank you both so much for participating tonight and for really inspiring us. Thank you.